All right, so who are we looking at here? This is Dan Schneider. He, New York Times once called him the Norman Lear of children's television. He is the creator and producer and writer of a bunch of Nickelodeon shows from the 90s and 2000s, even into the 2010s. So a few, that list would include, but is not limited to, things like All That, Drake and Josh, Kenan and Kel, The Amanda Show, iCarly, Victoria, Zoe 101, all of those kinds of shows, Dan Schneider was kind of behind them all, right? But he has kind of been in the public conversation as of late because of a docuseries released on Discovery called Quiet on Set, The Dark Side of Kids TV. And the show is basically, I think it's like a 4-part docuseries. I've been meaning to watch it. I've actually heard pretty good things. I was a little concerned about it because it seemed a little sensationalized, because it's about essentially highlighting all of these issues that were happening at Nickelodeon during these times, particularly when it came to things like sexism and racism and, potentially people not being in like a super great work environment, sometimes even toxic or hostile or even inappropriate. Dan Schneider has always been at the center of those conversations. Recently, the show was already getting a lot of attention, but in its, I think, second or third episode, Drake Bell revealed that he had been abused by a dialogue coach I think it was like on the set of All That. A dialogue coach, Brian Peck, who's also an actor, I believe. And I actually did a whole video about this, if you want to find that on my channel. But specifically, though, as the final episodes of the docuseries aired, a lot more attention was put on Dan Schneider, again, who left Nickelodeon in 2018, kind of during like that Me Too era, but no specific allegations ever quite emerged. But there's always been this stink around him and the whole thing, right? So here's like what the show has alleged. And people in the show who were being interviewed said this in the show, but I've also just said this in general. So one of the issues was a very toxic work environment. So reportedly Schneider had major temper issues that would just explode over like really minor things. And we had some testimony is the wrong word. It wasn't illegal in any sense, but kind of some testimony here from Amy Berg, who was his former assistant. She wrote for All That, which was like almost like teen SNL. It was like a teen sketch comedy show from like the late 90s. And supposedly she became a shut-in after working with him for only a year. And we have a quote from her saying, quote, people were asking her, if he had done anything inappropriate, and she said here, quote, "What I can confirm is that he is, pardon my French, a fucking asshole. A psychological tormentor. He introduced me to panic attacks, and the stress of working for him caused me to develop a significant heart arrhythmia." End quote. So, clearly Amy Berg did not have a great experience and blames him for later medical issues, which, I would not be surprised if that's the case. We also have reports here from these two writers who worked with him, Christy Stratton and Jenny Kilgan, who supposedly had to share a salary. That Schneider would only hire them if they basically agreed to split a normal salary. Which he later would claim that that's a very normal thing in the industry. It wasn't because they were two women. Sometimes I've seen it with two men. I've seen it with a man and a woman. But why did they have to share a set? Were they a writing duo? Were they partnered? Did they even know each other? I don't know. But just that's obviously not a good situation to be in. And then there's also, of course, the inappropriate conductiness of it all. So reportedly, he would leave pornography on his computer screen when people would come into his office. He also once told a writer, which he later said was in jest, but it's still really not appropriate. Told a writer he'd put one of her sketches in the show if she gave him a massage. And what is it with these creeps? Sorry, I'm not trying to be judgmental. I'm trying to be fair here, but what is it with these creeps and massages? Why do they think, that's the way I'll get Harvey Weinstein did it? I just don't understand it. What is it with the massages? And what I'm not trying to make light of this, but why in what universe is that a good strategy? If you're not, unless you, of course it's weird. Of course it's coercive. in what universe is that normal? Unless you're going into it knowing that this is not normal, but it's what suits your desires or whatever it is, right? And then also something that people have noted for years is just all of these like innuendos and like sexually coded jokes in these shows, presumably for children, right? The big one people always point to is feet. Feet. The guy clearly has a feet fetish, or maybe he does or doesn't, I don't know. But the amount of jokes relating to feet on these shows, and people sometimes licking feet or sucking on toes or having chocolate sauce poured on feet or whatever it might be, it's just very strange. And I think, so there's like all these things. Again, this isn't necessarily new information, or rather the information is new, but the general kind of insights and like the takeaways, we've known this for years now, right? So what is Schneider's response, right? So initially, so he's pretty tight-lipped. He doesn't make like a lot of public statements. So initially, a representative of him said, released this statement saying, quote, Dan expected and asked a lot from his teams. They worked long hours and consistently made successful shows. In the challenges of production, Dan could get frustrated at times, and he understands why some employees found that intimidating and stressful. But he also knows some people did not have a positive experience, and he's truly sorry for that. Dan knows he should have done better and feels awful about anyone who saw him at his worst instead of his best, end quote. No mention about the inappropriate conduct there, but reading this, I'm like, okay, that's all well and good, but like, why is a representative putting out a written statement saying this? Why doesn't he just speak out and apologize? But then that's exactly what he did. So if you see this other picture here, this is a more modern picture of him that surfaced recently. The surface is the wrong word, but he eventually spoke out directly in a 19-minute interview with, of all people, I forget the actor's name, but the guy who played Tebow from iCarly, the guy who worked across the street at the smoothie place, or maybe it wasn't the smoothie place, or whatever it was. I don't know why he's interviewing him, but in any case, in the video, I have not watched it, but from my understanding and what I've read, he seems fairly apologetic and emotional. From what I understand, it is defensive to a certain level, but from my understanding, this is not like a video like when YouTubers do something really bad and they like make like the obligatory like notes app apology, like it feels very hollow, or worse, it's just them being like, I did nothing wrong and here's why, blah 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 blah. From what I understand, this is a Dan Schneider who seems fairly remorseful. Now, whether if he's really remorseful or he just is remorseful because people are calling him out on it remains to be seen, right? But we have some quotes from him here saying, quote, watching over the past 2 nights, referring to the show, was very difficult. Me facing my past behavior, some of which are embarrassing and that I regret. I definitely owe some people a pretty strong apology, end quote. You think? We also have a quote here. He said, quote, when I watched the show, I could see the hurt in some people's eyes, and it made me feel awful and regretful and sorry. I wish I could go back, especially to those earlier years of my career, and bring the growth and the experience that I have now and just do a better job and never, ever feel like it was okay to be an asshole to anyone ever, end quote. But that being said, and again, he doesn't seem to address the inappropriateness. I think, I didn't write down the quote, but he talked about, sometimes like with the massages and all this stuff, like I shouldn't have done that, full stop. So again, that's good if you're owning up to it at the very least. He also talked about like the including of like inappropriate or like maybe innuendo-y things into the show. And his argument was kind of like, we were just trying to do things that kids found funny. And they didn't, and kids don't look into it or see certain things like that in that way, right? If they see you sucking on a toe, they just think it's hilarious. And he's like, but that being said, and then he also kind of passes the buck. He's like, well, there was a lot of people who reviewed every script and every joke. So, if someone had said it was a problem, we would have cut it. So he's also kind of passing the buck there. And he also, this isn't so much him rejecting comments people have made, but rather saying like, okay, yeah, that's true, but here's this good stuff I did. So he talks about, his comments seem to suggest, as he would like to present it, that he was a champion of his child stars and their safety. So he talks about being there for Drake Bell when, he was having his trial. And again, I highly recommend you go check out that other video of mine. But a big issue with that was that the accused was fairly popular in those acting circles. So he kind of convinced a lot of people that he was innocent. And at the trial, a lot of stars came in support of Brian Peck, right? Whereas Dan Schneider was was really there for Drake Bell, supposedly. He also claims he wrote Drake Bell's mother's speech for the trial that she made for the jury. He also talked about helping Amanda Bynes when she was trying to separate from her parents. People have always talked about that they've had an affair and he got her pregnant and she had to get an abortion and she was like 15 or 16 or whatever. I can't speak to any of that. There's not a lot of evidence for that, but again, that seems kind of like a coded defense of like those rumors being like, I was trying to be there for her because she was, a kid in a really dangerous situation. I was trying to help her out as best I could. We have this other quote here from Schneider saying, quote, "I can tell you why it hurts really bad for me. I was green." And if you don't know, green just means like you're new to an industry, right? "I was scared. I was excited. It meant the world to me that I was getting these opportunities. And I went in and I got lucky because my first couple experiences were fantastic. And the fact that I didn't pay it forward to every employee that walked through my door, it hurts my heart because I should have. And I wish I could go back and fix that." End quote. Well, you can't, right? So, it's good that you're apologizing, but a lot of the damage has been done. But again, he seems, at least from these comments, he seems genuinely remorseful. But again, it could all be a ruse. I don't say I shouldn't use the word ruse because that really implies some kind of like mischievous or malicious, intent under the surface. But I don't know. I feel like if with all of Me Too, if he had really done something really, really bad, like actually sexually assaulted somebody, I think that would have come out at this point. He's no longer at Nickelodeon. His social and cultural cachet have completely plummeted. I feel like if he had done something, and this is not to excuse this other stuff where it's like, oh, well, at least he didn't sexually assault anybody. That's not what I'm saying. But I feel like if he had done something of that level, it would have come out at this point, especially with a show like this. Discovery would have ate that shit up and people watching it would have eaten that shit up. So, it's good to see that at least some words of remorse and contrition are being had. But again, does that really, solve anything?